So for the criteria for an API to be considered RESTful, one, like you mentioned, it has to have a uniform interface. That is, you must have a URL, URI, as the case may be, that specifically points to the resource you want to locate and then manipulate or retrieve, create, update, all of you. And secondly, like I also mentioned, is that it has to be client server based. So you must have a client and then you must have a server. So the client sends a request via HTTP. That's what manages the request using the methods, the various action webs. And then you have a server that handles the request basically and then sends back the response to the user. So client server, client browser, server, server. Moreover, it has to be stateless. So like the state of the client, like this, the client can actually have a state, but the server must be stateless as any case may be. So your API must be stateless. Also, it has to be cacheable, essentially for data management, right? Then it has to be able to allow, must allow for layered system, multiple layers. And then the code must be coded. So even if you want to return static files, you want to ensure that you can also return a code that can actually be used, that is dynamic essentially. These are the criteria, right? Most at least importantly, it must have a URL, must be client-based, send through HTTP request, and stateless, and the other ones also. So these are the methods. So we have post to create, get to read, say retrieve, update, which is we use put to like update an existing data, and then delete to remove, delete it. All right. Okay, so bringing this back. All right, so we have our URL, then we have our action word managed through HTTP. This is the client server architecture. This is the client server returning the data, then it's returning it as a JSON file in this case, right? JSON file is one of the ways that we can basically return. We can even send that return REST APIs, data using REST APIs, right? We can also use in SOAP we use XML, and then we can also transfer via SMTP. Okay. So these are the other ones. So we have XML RPC, it's a protocol that relies on a specific type of XML, but the SOAP uses a proprietary one, essentially. So that than SOAP, basically it's just different type of XML. Then JSON doesn't use JSON RPC doesn't use XML or using JSON to transfer data. So now let's talk about the main two and let's look at the differences. All right, so on the left, actually I have SOAP, and then on the right I have REST. So SOAP is basically it's a protocol, but the REST is a set of principles. It's an architectural principle, but this one is SOAP is an XML-based protocol. Okay, so it uses the WSDL to communicate between consumer and users, providers, whereas REST uses XML and JSON to send and receive data. Okay, so it's also sent by calling the RPC method, whereas REST uses the URL, like I mentioned. So, and one thing about SOAP is that the result is not readable by human, but very importantly, for REST API, like the one I showed before, you can see you can literally read it. You can read the result. You can see ID is 1, name is this, price is this. So for REST, the results are human readable. So the transfer of data is over SMTP, FTP, in addition to HTTP. But for REST, it's only HTTP. I have to use the action method. So what are the common examples of API? We have universal logins, which I've mentioned briefly, like Google, Facebook. You can basically log in and register, sign up for an app using your socials. Then we have third-party payments like PayPal, Stripe. You go to visit the site and you see that. But now you see pay with your PayPal. So it's basically an API. So it's happy with your own data and PayPal, and the application doesn't have to do another payment platform. You can just use that one. So you can talk to PayPal using their API. The traveling booking comparison tool works. Google Maps, you can get the API and you can even use it on your own application. You can use Google Maps API. The Twitter also, you can use that public API. So what are the importance? So one thing is that API improves collaboration. So with APIs, different parts of the team can actually work with the same resource, right? Because using the URL, using uh, the resource locator identifier, but everybody working on the project can access the same database, the same server, and work with the same data. So improve collaboration. And then is there innovation? For instance, I don't have to create my own music application. Where I can just implement and integrate Spotify into my own application. Makes work easy. I don't have to build my own voice recognition app. I just use an API to just do that for me. Then data monetization. Because you can create your own API and then it is paid for and then you get some money from it. Some application do that. So some API I paid for that we have to subscribe to it. Then of course there's a layer of security that APIs generally produce. Because the ability to be secured, by the way, like I mentioned, it can be required at some point to make some user authentication and then you can give it a prayer token, which is specific to you. So that way it is secured, essentially. So here we have it. API is basically net application talks to themselves, or different parts of an application. So the back end to the front end to back end, one application to the application, one application front end to the front end. The interesting thing is that let's say you're building an application, you can just build an API with any of the server side, let's say PHP, JavaScript, or Python, and you can apply it to your front end project. So let's say you're building a front end project with React and Vue or Angular, right? So you can create an API with Laravel, PHP or pure PHP or Vue or Node and Express. Then your application can access it essentially, and then your front-end application, and you can create another front-end application that's still it. So that way, even if you change your front-end structure, the data is not changed. The data remains the same, and the server remains the same. You can still always connect to it using the API. That's one interesting thing about it. So even the site can go up, the data is still there, and the server is still there. And with the API, you can still access it. That is the beauty, and I hope that you have a full grasp of what an API is. And I'm just going to be so APIs, application talk to themselves or interact or share data or functionality, or just functionality. And how it works is that basically work on the client server-based architecture, because as a client, your browser or your application, your phone, you can send a request through the URL. I have via HTTP, SMTP, FTP, depending on which protocol or which principle you're using, whether it is SOAP or REST. And then once it sends the request to the server, then the server decide what to do with it. Maybe it should get something to the database or return something to the database, or maybe not even get to the database, but just do some function or some strings or some functionality, and they send the response back to the person. So response can be sent as plain text, as XML, as JSON. Case, but typically for REST API, majority of the time the response is always JSON. And then you can now pass that JSON using any language of choice to the front end and for the user to basically say that is the initial application I was making. That is it about API. If you have any question, you can drop it in the comment section. I'll be happy to help. Semeter again, thanks for listening.